So this is an analysis of The World by Christina Rossetti. The first thing to think about when we're analysing this poem is the context in which it was written. So it was written in about 1854, and this was just before Rossetti's quite famous religious breakdown, where she really started to struggle with the demands of her faith and really questioned whether she could adhere to all of the rules that she was having to. This was also after her termination of her engagement because of religious reasons. So you can see that the context affecting this writing is all about religious faith and questioning temptation and how difficult it is to uphold your Christian values. So when we are analysing this, I have used purple annotations for structure, green annotations for context, and pink annotations for language, only so that gives you a clear idea of which AOs you're hitting when you're looking at different types of analysis. So let's look at the first quatrain. By day she woos me, soft, exceeding fair, but all night as the moon so changeth she, loathsome and foul with hideous leprosy, and subtle serpents gliding in her hair. So the first point of analysis is the use of this female pronoun, she. So we learn that the day is referred to as she, and later we understand that that's a negative connotation. It's interesting that Rossetti, as a woman, decided to use a female pronoun to refer to something negatively. It could reflect an anti-feminist standpoint. So we know that there was a bit of a contradiction in Rossetti in that she liked some of the feminist ideals, but others she felt that women should be traditional and should adhere to traditional roles because of her religious beliefs. So it could be negative. There's also a bit of a connotation with a femme fatale, with the use of the wooing next to this. So the femme fatale, the literary figure about being seductive and being dangerous, and that's kind of how she sees the day. Now the day is the thing that tricks her. The day is where all of the temporal delights of the world are shown to her, and it's at daytime that she finds it really difficult to maintain her religious beliefs because there's so much temptation around. So the day takes on this really dangerous, as I said before, seductive persona. And then the personal pronoun of me just emphasizes that this is a personal experience, and a lot of Rossetti's poems do use a personal experience from the narrative perspective, because it is about her own personal journey through religion and the difficulties of religion. Remember, she was writing for herself most of the time rather than to be published, so this was about her exploring her own beliefs and her own difficulties. So the use of the adjective soft and fair, this just emphasizes the use of the feminine. So this is how we know that the day is trying to be seductive, and we know that the narrator is finding it hard to resist because the day is soft and fair. So really gentle, really beautiful, giving this appearance of being really quite lovely. But actually we know that there's something sinister about it, and the use of the conjunction but does show us that even though the day seems lovely and seems wonderful, there's something about it that shouldn't be trusted. So this might be a warning to the reader. And then when she says the night as the moon so changeth she, so comparing the night to the moon, the idea of the moon and women, so remember we're using the day and women as the same sort of thing, we're using a female character for the day. This contextual link to the moon is all about the fact that it's a long-held belief, and still a belief actually, that women are controlled by the moon, so certain phases of the moon control certain moods of women. And you think about the cycle of the 28 days linking to menstruation. So the idea is that women are changeable like the moon, so inconsistent. And the idea of her changing is this mask. So the use of day hides the bad things about nighttime. So what Rossetti is trying to say is that the nighttime is an honest time. So there is danger, there's evil, there's things lurking around in the nighttime, but everybody knows that. But in the day, these things still happen, but they are masked by other things, by prettier things, by brighter things. So the light there covers the bad things about nighttime. So it's almost like she respects the nighttime because the nighttime is honest, whereas the daytime tries to blind her and tries to woo her into believing something different. And then we've got these binary opposites. So this is how you know there's a massive difference between the way she feels about the day and the way she feels about the night. So the day, with its exceeding fair and it being soft, the nighttime is loathsome and foul, so completely different adjectives used there to show the contrast between day and night. And then about the hideous leprosy. This is a biblical reference. So leprosy was believed to be a punishment for a sin that had been committed. So obviously this sin here is about the reference to St Mary Magdalene Hospital, because Rossetti spent a lot of time there with the fallen women, and they would have suffered diseases, mostly sexual diseases, but leprosy probably would have been something that would have happened at some point, and any sort of disease was considered to be a punishment from God if you were quite a religious person. So by the night having this hideous leprosy shows that this is a really dangerous place to be. And then this is only emphasised by the fact that Day, as a character, has subtle serpents gliding in her hair. So the sibilance of the subtle serpents really gives it this sinister hissing kind of tone. And then contextually, when we think of the serpents, we think of Eden or we think of Medusa. It doesn't matter either way which one you pick up on for your intertextual reference, but both of them were a punishment for committing a sin. So Eden was the sin of knowledge, and Medusa was the sin of being beautiful. So either way, they were both punishments inflicted upon women for doing things that were wrong. So perhaps this is Rossetti warning herself or warning other women not to try and be something other than a traditional woman, not to give in to temptation. And the subtle serpents as well is a subversion of the romantic images of the Petrarchan sonnet. So from a structural point of view, this seems to be a sonnet ostensibly, and it kind of fits into the quatrain couplet Petrarchan structure, but you'll see that the use of serpents really does subvert those romantic images. So she's almost trying to show that there's a very subtle link between love and sin, and that love can lead to sin. So there's that overlap, and she's done that through the use of structure. And then finally, when you're thinking about the contrast between day and night, this could be symbolic of the narrator's experience or the narrator's opinion of the fall of man. So the difference between being with God and being without God. So the daylight doesn't really show you what the danger is hanging about at the night time. Moving on to the second quatrain. By day she woos me to the outer air, ripe fruits, sweet flowers, and full satiety. But through the night a beast she grins at me, a very monster void of love and prayer. So there's an anaphora here of wooing, and by day she woos, so that's exactly the same as the first stanza. And this anaphora shows the relentlessness of temptation, that day by day she tries to tempt her, she tries to take her from her path of righteousness, and she doesn't ever stop. And that perhaps shows how difficult the narrator is finding it to keep on a faithful path. And then you've got this reference to the ripe fruits and the sweet flowers. So these I would consider to be temporal delights. So by temporal delights, I mean delights that don't last forever. So they're bright and shiny, but then they're gone the next minute. And these are the things that Rossetti is really critical of in a lot of her poetry, that she thinks that people are often blinded by beautiful things or material possessions, and they don't consider how important it is to maintain your faith and your religion. And I think what's interesting about these particular images is they can be thought of as references to sex and romance. So the ripe fruit's about being ready for sex and being quite sexually alive. And then the flowers could be, you know, you could link that to giving flowers to a loved one and wooing somebody. So the fact that she's used those two romantic images suggests that perhaps this poem is more about sex and romance than anything else. Again, we've got this conjunction. So she's said about the fruits and the flowers, and she's like, but this is a warning to you. Even though it looks lovely and it looks pretty, there's a beast knocking about. So there's that scaremongering that goes on in this poem. It's almost propaganda in the way that it's produced. And then the beast and the monster, you could think of this in many different ways. The first image that springs to mind is the image of Satan, with it being a beast and a monster. And because this has a religious overtone, then that would make most sense. However, it could be more abstractly temptation, or it could also be the femme fatale. So any of those three interpretations work for this. Okay, and then we've got this contrast between day and night again. So day seems pretty, seems lovely, and then night is the beast. So it's really scary for people, and that's when people find it difficult to maintain their religious beliefs. Coming on to the next section. By day she stands a lie, by night she stands in all the naked horror of the truth, with pushing horns and clawed and clutching hands. So the first bit, by day she stands a lie, this is again a reference to the fact that daytime is the time at which the evils of nighttime are hidden. And there's that contextual link to night with evil and loss, and the idea that at nighttime bad things happen. So if you think of intertextually, in Othello, Iago commits his evil actions at nighttime, and horror genre always happens at nighttime. So it's no surprise that night is a reference to evil. But at nighttime, it's truthful. So remember, that's what she's saying. At least we know where we are at nighttime. We expect bad things to happen. So it's almost worse in the daytime because we don't expect these things to happen and they're hidden away. So maybe you've got more chance at nighttime because you're on your defense anyway, whereas in the daytime you're more vulnerable. So we've got really hyperbolic imagery here. So she talks about the naked horror of the truth. So the idea that there's nothing worse than the things that happen at nighttime. And then there's some more blatant satanic imagery here. The horns and the claws are two features associated quite heavily with Satan. And the clawing and the clutching, that alliteration there really suggests that this is really unpleasant. The violent verbs show the danger of the temptation. And then finally, in this part of the poem, it's really important to realise that this is a tercet rather than a quatrain. So if we were following the Petrarchan sonnet structure, this should be another quatrain, but it's a tercet. So maybe this is showing a bit of resistance on the narrator's part. So is this narrator resisting temptation by messing with the way that the structure is? Or is this Rossetti resisting romance by resisting the structure of a romantic form? And then the final tercet, which again should have been a rhyming couplet if we were using the Petrarchan sonnet form. Is this a friend indeed, that I should sell my soul to her, give her my life and youth, till my feet cloven two take hold on hell? So this is a questioning part of the poem. This really shows the struggle that Rossetti seems to have when thinking about religion and her faith. And this idea of questioning whether it's a friend is really quite good at animating or illustrating how difficult she's finding being able to ascertain what's good and what's bad. So is daytime with all its temporal delights, or is sex, or is romance, is temptation okay? Is it something that you're allowed to have a little bit of? She's questioning that. Is it a friend? So it's quite tentative. It doesn't seem like she's sure. But then when she comes on to say, Is this a friend indeed that I should sell my soul to her, give my life and youth? It's quite hyperbolic, the idea of her selling her soul. It's a zealous religious belief, that idea that if you do anything bad, you're selling your soul to Satan, you're giving yourself over to the dark side. And the tripling here, my soul, my life, my youth, suggests the price of temptation. So this kind of goes against the original interpretation of this being a tentative question, because actually the tripling and the hyperbole suggest that she definitely doesn't believe that giving into temptation is the right thing to do, unless you're willing to give up your soul, your life and your youth, which I guess not many people are. And then another reference to Satan with the cloven hooves. So Satan was given cloven hooves because he couldn't be a human figure, because he was disfigured because of the way that he conducted himself, and the idea that from a biblical perspective, evil things give you disfigurements or give you illnesses. It could also be a reference to incubi and succubi. So they were sometimes considered to have goat characteristics. So maybe the cloven hooves, or the bottom half of them would be goats. These were basically mythical figures that would have sex with people while they were asleep, or tempt people into having sex with them. So it's definitely a sexual connotation. And so that makes us think that perhaps this poem is about sexual temptation and Rossetti's struggle to resist it, I suppose. And then with this rhetorical question at the end here, is this a rhetorical question? So is she saying this is definitely not okay, you should always resist temptation? Or is it interrogative? Does she leave this poem saying, I'm not actually sure, I don't know? So there are lots of things to think about with this poem, but essentially this is a poem about the struggle to resist temptation and how dangerous it is to give in to temptation.